Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous video, we looked at the SQL security users and how SQL logins access the server, the database, and the tables themselves. Now I'm actually going to demonstrate that with the virtuals, VMs that I've created. You'll notice here that I'm using an application, a virtual machine application called VMware Workstation 12 Player. This is free, so that's why I'm using this. Now, obviously, I've created two VMs, two virtual machines, one the Windows Active Domain Controller, which is this, and then a workstation here. Now, I'm not going to illustrate to you how I got to this state because I'll be going over the creation of a VM workstation and how to create a Windows domain server, even though I'd done it in the first video, in more detail when I take the third course, or when I produce the third course called HA Solutions. At that time, I'll be creating what's called a cluster, so you'll get a very detailed understanding of how to create this. But for the time being, we're going to use this right now. So you can at this time follow this along and just pay attention to what constitutes a Windows username and what constitutes a SQL login. So as you can notice, I'm in the Active Directory, and the first thing I'm going to do, obviously, is create a Windows user account. Now, in this case, I've already created one called Tom, and the way I created that is right-click, New, User, and then I fill this out, and I filled out Tom here. When you click OK, you get this user account. So there it is. So now if I go to the workstation, so imagine this is Tom. He's going to his workstation, and he logs on. And remember, now he's a part of the domain, so that's why it's DBA/Tom. And he punches in his password. So let's Tom log on to his computer, and there it is. And actually, let's make it a little wider because we'll be concentrating on that a little more. So now Tom is on his computer, and he logs on to SQL Server. So now he needs access to SQL. So he's going to use his Windows authentication, and this is his username. Now, if he connects, obviously he's going to be denied access. And as we mentioned, he's denied access because even though he's been created a Windows user account, even though he's been allowed access within the server, the environment that is, but he's not allowed access to the actual SQL server, and that's because he does not have an SQL login. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as an administrator to that test SQL server. I'm going to connect. And this is an administrator connecting. And you can certainly see that immediately because you've got SQL agent also. And if I go to security, and if I go under logins, you'll notice that I do not have a login called DBA/Tom. That's why he cannot access the SQL server, even though he's in the physical box itself. So the first thing I have to do is create a login. So I'm going to go right-click, New Login, and I'm going to use Windows Authentication, and I'm going to search for him. And the location, obviously, is in the entire directory. So I'm going to go OK. So now I'm going to look for the Windows user called Tom, and I'm going to check the name, and there he is. So I'm going to go OK. At this point, don't worry about anything. All I'm doing is I'm mapping the Windows username Tom to an SQL login called Tom. If I go OK, you'll see that now I have a login called SQL Tom. And that's great. So now he's accessed the physical server, which is the test. So that in itself isn't great. Obviously, he needs to do work, so he needs to access databases. So now if I click on Database, and there's a database called AdventureWorks. Now, obviously, I'm the system admin, so I can access it, and you can see that by SA, system admin, and I can view all the tables, and I can view all the views, and so on. So I can view all the objects. So now let's say Tom connects to this server. So we'll make a connection, Windows connection, go user, and now since I've mapped his Windows username to an SQL login, you just saw me create that, he'll be able to actually access the server itself. So if I connect that, you'll see there he is, Tom. One thing you'll notice, I don't see SQL agent here. And that's because he's a user and not an administrator. So now that he's accessed the physical computer, as we said, well, about the databases. If I click on the database here, you'll see the AdventureWorks here. If he tries to double click there and access the database, you'll see that he's not allowed, he's denied. And that's because we've said that even though he's got an SQL login to access SQL Server, he still needs a SQL user. So now we're going to create a user. And how do we do that? So I'm going to go back to my administrative account, which is SA. I'm going to go to security. I'm going to go to database, I'm going to expand the database that he's interested in. In this case, is AdventureWorks. So I'm going to expand it. Now you'll see a tab folder called security. And I'm going to click that. And I'm going to click users. You'll see that, as I mentioned, that even though he can access the database, now even though he's accessed the server, now that he needs access to the database, I have to create an SQL user. So I have to right click, go new user, and I'm going to find the login. I'm going to find the login, go browse, and obviously the login now is called Tom. So I'm going to go OK, and I'm going to OK. And there it is. So that's the login name. The username, obviously we can give it a different, but I'm going to give it Tom. Don't make things more complicated. Again, don't worry about all this stuff here. We'll be going over this briefly later. So now if I go OK, you'll see that Tom now is not only has an SQL login, but now he has an SQL user. So now I've given him access to that database. So we'll go back to Tom. And now if I click on that again, let's refresh it. Now remember, he could not access that database when he did. Now that I've given him permission as created a user, he can see the objects within it. But now if he goes to the table and refresh, you'll see that he cannot view any of the tables. And if I go to the database as an administrator, you can obviously see that I've got a tremendous amount of tables that he cannot access. So again, a granular control of what the users can access. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to only give him permission for Human Resources Department. So in order for me to give him permission, now he cannot see any tables here. I just want him to be able to only view this table. And if I want him to do that, I'll go right click on the table, go to Properties, go to Permissions, and then I'm going to go Search. I'm going to go Browse. I'm going to go Find Tom. I'm going to go OK. OK. And now you'll notice that I have options of what permissions I'm allowed to give Tom to that one table. I can give him permission to alter, to control, to delete, insert, select, and so on. The one I'm going to give him right now is select, meaning he should only be able to view it. So this is the SQL user. He's only going to be able to view that table. So if I go OK, and now I've given him permission. So now if we go back to Tom's view, remember he has no tables here. So if I refresh it, you'll see that he has access to that table. So now remember, I only give him view so he can see all the data within that table. And let's just do a select statement. And you can see that he can see those 16 rows and all the data, all the columns. Now, can he delete this table? Because I have not given him permission to delete. I have only given him permission to view, which is the select statement. So let's see if he can. If he right clicks and deletes and goes OK, you'll see that it says cannot drop table because it does not exist, or you do not have permission. He does not have permission. So what if I want it to be even more granular? And let's just assume that we don't want him to access group name or modified date or department ID. I just want him to look at actually just department ID and name. So this is the only column that I want him to view. Well, I can do that also. I can control that. Back to my system admin, tables, human resources, properties, permissions. And obviously this is as a SA you're doing it. Uncheck that. And now you'll see column permissions for Tom. If there are multiple users here, you would highlight the user and click column. So I want him to only be able to view the department ID and name. So I don't want him to see the group name or the modified date. And if I go OK and OK, and now remember, this is his select statement. So if I go execute, I'll get a permission denied for those two columns. And so he's not allowed this one, as you can see right here, column name. And he's not allowed modified date. So you can't view those two columns. And as I said, we can become very granular. And there you go. And if I wanted him to, as I illustrated previously, if I wanted to just to give him one row, I can by doing a where clause. But I don't think we need to do that. But that illustrates what I've been telling you about how granular you can become in managing permissions, roles, permissions, and security for each individual user. Now, obviously, in this example, I'm using Tom as an individual user. Ideally, in a production environment, you will control permissions and security through groups in the Windows domain user and roles in the SQL environment. And I'll be illustrating that next. And then we'll go over meticulously what server roles are. We'll talk about credentials. We'll talk about audits and so on. So at this time, I'm going to leave this here, and this will give you an example of what we illustrated academically before, and that is how SQL manages SQL logins and security. So I think I'll leave it there, and we'll pick it up in the next video. So my name is Rafael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.